Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We have a lot to get through, so we're going to jump right in, right on 11:30. My name is Sophie Beard, and I'm the Climate Strategy Lead here at Ironbark Sustainability. I'll be facilitating this webinar on emissions reporting for local governments. I'm excited for all the great speakers we have lined up for you. I'm speaking from the traditional land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation in Naarm, also known as Melbourne. I wish to acknowledge them as the traditional custodians and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. I would also like to recognise all of Australia's First Nations people who have been sustainably caring for country for over 50,000 years. To give you a quick overview of the session today, I'm going to go through a bit of housekeeping and background first up, then we'll dive into emissions inventories. Ankit Kamra will take you through how local governments are preparing for climate reporting. Then Matt Shorten from Trellis is going to be talking about how software can help to digitise climate action. Finally, we're going to hear from Lynch from East Gippsland Shire Council about their sustainability journey over the last few years. At 12:30, we'll have a Q&A with our speakers, so hopefully you can stick around, who will also be joined by Ironbark's Matt Sullivan to answer all your questions on emissions reporting. We have a lot of attendees today, so please keep yourself on mute. And if you have any questions, ask them in the chat as they come out throughout the presentation. If we don't have time today to answer everything, we'll follow up with people after the webinar. Please try to be as specific and clear as possible when asking your questions and indicate if it's directed to a specific speaker. Also note that the webinar is being recorded and will be available to everyone on our website afterwards. We would like to see your faces though, so please turn your cameras on. It just makes things a bit more engaging for our speakers and also more interesting for all of you to be able to see each other. Ironbark has been supporting action on climate change for over 20 years now. We have around 30 staff, all of whom are working with councils and their communities to reduce emissions and adapt to climate impacts, from practical project delivery of LED smart lighting through to developing whole of community climate action plans. We work with around 200 local governments and a dozen or so businesses every year. We always like to start our webinars with a quick look at who's in the room. We've got a good spread of people from across the country today, and it's great to see that the majority of you have undertaken some kind of emissions reporting. We've got a few people in the very early stages of understanding climate reporting, but most of you are getting your heads around it or feeling like you're pretty well across the process. And what you want to know. So we've had over 80 questions from people as they signed up, and we have tried to answer most of them in the presentation today. A lot of you want to know what your obligations are at the moment and when mandatory reporting is going to come into effect. We've also had a lot of questions about how to approach Scope 3 emissions and people wanting to know what other local governments are doing in this space. If you missed our webinar back in July last year, it is recorded and on our website. I recommend you check it out because it kind of covers a lot of the background to what we're going to talk about today. But as a very quick recap, so we're all on the same page. We're just talking about corporate organisational emissions, not looking into community emissions today. Matt talked us through the 3 emission scopes, and the most important thing to remember for today is that Scope 3 emissions are also known as value chain emissions, and this includes both your upstream emissions like construction materials and contractor fuels, and also the downstream emissions, for example, assets that you lease out to the community. And supply chain emissions are a subset of your value chain and only associated with those upstream activities. So that's goods and services supplied to you. So that's just, some definitions that will help us down the track. Last time, Ankit also simplified the jargon, describing how all the different reporting frameworks have been distilled into the new climate-related disclosures or Australian Sustainability Reporting Standards, which is quite a mouthful. So as the name of this webinar suggests, we're going to be talking a lot about this today because it's a reporting framework that meets requirements for businesses, but it will also set local governments up well for future obligations. The other thing One other thing we covered last time was the different company reporting groups that are affected by the new climate disclosures legislation. And really this is just to highlight that whilst local governments aren't captured in this legislation, the value chain elements of the standards means that most organisations in Australia, including local governments, will need to report emissions as part of the up or downstream elements of these companies' operations. The number one question we were asked in sign-ups for this webinar was some variation of what are our obligations? And the short answer is right now, for most local governments in Australia, climate and sustainability reporting is voluntary. There are two main exceptions to this. The first one being that councils with high emissions, like those who are managing landfills, may need to report under NGAs or other regulatory processes. And the other exception is Victorian councils, where the Local Government Act 2020 introduced requirements to ensure that decision-making is informed by and seeks to minimise climate change risks across several sectors. Looking to the future now, this is all likely to change. Each state government is exploring how to integrate climate reporting into its departments, which will include local governments. The specific requirements will be different in each state, but we're expecting that they'll all align with these climate-related disclosure standards, or ASRS, that form the basis of the legislation for corporations. We don't yet know exactly when this will happen, and because each state will introduce their own legislation, we're expecting the timing will be different across the country. We are seeing a lot of councils preparing for this reporting though, and asking for support. So what does it actually look like? The requirements for corporations is to annually disclose climate risks and opportunities impacting their businesses. This needs to take into account impacts on their value chain and resilience of the business to climate change. They also need to consider the financial implications of climate change and identify how strategy and decision-making processes take into account these risks and opportunities. What local governments are doing to prepare for and align with this is to consider both mitigation and adaptation, which you can do by developing an inventory and action plan for emissions reduction for council's operations and preparing a climate risk assessment and adaptation plan for council's assets and services, and then setting up a system for annual reporting on both of these. Now, we could talk about everything local governments are doing across each of these elements, but that would probably require us to be here all day. We've had a lot of people asking for more information on inventories and emissions reporting, so that's our focus for today. We do also have lots of experience in the team supporting councils with climate risk and adaptation, so please let us know if you need our help or would like a future webinar covering this. We'll be sending a link to a feedback form at the end of the webinar, so you can let us know through that. For now though, I'm going to get going on talking about inventories and how to get a comprehensive understanding of your emissions. When we put together the local government review last year, we analysed what councils are including in their inventories and came up with a couple of standard emissions breakdowns. So on the left, we have a typical council without a landfill, and you can see that electricity is the #1 contributor to emissions, followed by natural gas and street lighting. For a council with a landfill or wastewater treatment, however, these then become the dominant emission sources, and things like electricity for buildings and street lighting become less significant. So what these two examples really highlight is that inventories across the local government sector are highly varied, and this makes it really difficult to compare and benchmark because what's being included or excluded changes a lot between different inventories. The other thing I'd like to point out here is that most emissions captured in these typical council inventories to date have been Scope 1 and 2 sources. So except for street lighting, up until now, Scope 3 emissions have mostly been limited to minor sources like water, refrigerants and paper, things like that. So this begs the question, why is everyone talking about Scope 3 emissions? The second most requested topic from all of you was, tell us how to report on Scope 3. To help explain its significance, I'm going to show you a couple of graphs from a piece of work we've recently done. So I'm not using actual totals in this example, but the percentage breakdown reflects the real scale of different emissions for a local government. The first graph is the emissions breakdown for an inventory that includes the typical emission sources that we saw on the previous slide. So this council manages a landfill and wastewater treatment, which alongside electricity are the main emission sources. And then this is the breakdown for the same council after we explored their supply chain. So you can see straight away that the most significant source of emissions is actually in the supply chain. So larger than the waste and electricity emissions. And in terms of total emissions for this inventory, you're looking at a 50% increase when the supply chain is included. So yeah, you can see it's got a big impact. I spoke earlier about scope 3, including upstream or supply chain emissions and downstream emissions. That's kind of the full value chain. But for now, I'm just going to talk about the supply chain because this is easier out of the two to capture, and it's also where we're mostly helping councils at the moment. In the past, we have investigated downstream emissions. They're looking at leased assets and financial investments, which can be a big chunk. So it's definitely possible if you want to get stuck into that part of your value chain. The first thing to know about supply chain reporting is that this is a new endeavour for most organisations across Australia, not just for local governments. So like we saw earlier, the focus over the last few decades has been on reporting scopes 1 and 2 with quite limited scope 3 emissions. So what we've got here is an overview of the reporting process that we expect most organisations to move through. So of those who have started considering scope 3, some are at this first step of establishing an initial estimate of supplier emissions. A few organisations have started that next step and are developing systems for regular collection of their data. Then after that, you should be building internal capacity to include supply chain emissions in reporting and decision-making across the org. And then in the long term, you'll need to implement ongoing solutions for tracking and then optimising these processes. So I'm going to talk through that first step now because, as we saw at the beginning of the webinar, most of you here today are at the point of dipping your toes in the water. I'd like to point out that this is just one way to start your scope 3 reporting journey. We're talking about this because it's a reasonably straightforward process, and it's what we've been doing with councils who have limited budget to explore this. The first thing we do is get hold of your procurement data. So engaging with your procurement and finance teams is really crucial to do early on. I'd like to give a shout out to all the finance people who have signed up for today's webinar. It's great to see you here and getting on the front foot. So once we've got that data, we identify what type of goods and services each supplier is delivering. So for example, do they supply construction materials or provide cleaning services or waste collection? And we use the standard industrial classification codes to do this, which will link to a business's ABN. So once we have these 2 bits of information, we can then apply coefficients to estimate the emissions. At the moment, Australia doesn't have a standardised set of emissions coefficients for this, although there has been talk of Climate Active making their coefficients freely available, but we don't have an exact timeline for this. It's important to understand that these coefficients are average emissions per dollar spend on that type of product or service. So using this method, your supply chain inventory won't reflect the actual emissions from your suppliers, rather a ballpark estimate. And this is just a first step, and it's everyone's starting point at the moment. So the expectation is that over time, your suppliers will have a better understanding of their emissions and they can then tell you their actual data, which will improve your own reporting. So that's our dive onto scope 3. What about scope 4? You might have come across this idea of scope 4 emissions and be wondering where it fits into reporting. So we've spoken already about this scopes diagram, which sets the boundary for organisational inventories. Scope 4 emissions are also called avoided emissions, and they sit outside of this reporting framework. An example for a local government with a landfill is when a garden organics or food and garden organics collection is introduced, and that waste is diverted away from landfill and turned into compost. So the reduction in landfill emissions associated with this would reduce the council's Scope 1 emissions. But if you went one step further and calculated how much that compost would reduce demand for fertiliser, and then the avoided emissions from not manufacturing that fertiliser, that would fall under Scope 4 emissions. So it's really looking kind of beyond your operational control and what the even further downstream effects could be of your activity. And this kind of information is useful for understanding that broader environmental impact of an activity, and it can be a really great communication tool with your community on the success of individual programs. However, Scope 4 emissions should not be forming part of your emissions inventory or be used to offset Scope 1, 2 or 3 emissions, because they don't represent real reductions within your operational boundary. That wraps up our deep dive on emissions for today, and I'm going to hand over now to Ankit Kamra, who is our inventory and data lead here at Ironbark. So Ankit's going to talk more about how councils are starting to report in alignment with climate disclosure standards.
Thanks, Sophie. So over the last few slides, we covered disclosures, focusing on mitigation, inventory, and covering inventory and reporting. And Sophie walked you through inventory, and now I'll take you through reporting. By the way, everything Sophie presented on the inventory side of things is also covered under reporting as a full sort of package. But now for the time being, let's explore what reporting means for you, your role in climate aligned reporting, and how to overcome challenges which might come up as part of this process. Mind you, this is an evolving space, as most of you would have seen. So you might see some fine-tuning and standardization as we move forward. Next one, Sophie. First, let's cover the shift in reporting and financial risks. So climate reporting has evolved significantly. It's no longer just about environmental goals now. It's directly tied to financial risk and accountability. So councils need to assess how climate risks impact their financial position. Think about extreme weather, damaging infrastructure, or high rising insurance costs. These are real financial impacts that councils need to manage. Simply put, climate-related risks are now becoming financial risks. So councils need to integrate these into risk management, budgets, and annual reports, just as you guys do with other financial risks. Another sub-aspect is on the adaptation and mitigation, although we are not focusing on the adaptation side of things, but still there's a key distinction here in terms of that adaptation presents a greater financial risk than mitigation. Although mitigation focuses on reducing emissions, adaptation is dealing with those unavoidable climate impacts, such as I mentioned, extreme weather events, floods, bushfires, which places significant financial pressure on councils and communities. Now, planning for these now will help reduce future financial risk for sure. Next one, Sophie. Now, moving from the shift in reporting in terms of who's involved and why it matters. Now, there has been a lot of questions which I've heard in terms of, isn't this something for finance or accounting teams? Now, that's exactly why it matters. These standards were designed with maybe finance people or accountants in mind, but they directly affect sustainability, net zero, climate change efforts. So across these roles, council staff, your role is to ensure sustainability risks are accurately represented in financial reporting. That means you need to work with your finance teams, ELTs, councillors to help them understand climate risks and ensure decision makers have the right data and information. Next one, Sophie. Some of the examples you'll see in these screenshots, in which there are councils who have started thinking on this sort of pathway to integrate climate reporting into annual sort of reporting. What you see on the screen is a screenshot from Blacktown City Council's work on integrated climate-related financial disclosures. Thanks to Blacktown for sharing this, where they are trying to include all sorts of climate reporting as part of the overall annual reporting. On the further screenshots, there are some of the thought processes which councils have started to work across in terms of how they think this entire climate related financial disclosures could be combined with the annual reporting. And as this evolves, we'll see further refinements and standardization as well. Again, just to mention, we have Jamie from East Gippsland Shire Council as well. He's going to share some of his experience as well as they have moved on this pathway. Next one, Sophie. So from what it means for councils, we'll move to the taking action and your role in climate aligned reporting, from basically moving from understanding to action. Now you have discussed what it means for you. You have a plan in place. Next step is ensuring we have the right set of systems, processes to track, collect, and report climate risk data. As I mentioned, you need to engage finance teams and other key stakeholders. It may be via training, capacity building, and other modes of engagement. That's one of the key actions councils need to take in order to move forward in integrating climate reporting with annual reporting. Next sub-aspect, which is the key one, is collaboration. Now, this is not a one-team job. For effective climate reporting, we need collaboration across sustainability, net zero, climate, finance, assets, and risk teams. We need to clearly define roles and responsibility, which will be a key to successful implementation of climate reporting. Now, not even limiting to internal collaboration within council, working across councils is just as important. So climate risks don't stop at council boundaries. So, for example, emergency planning for extreme weather events often requires a coordinated regional response involving state government, power companies, and neighboring councils as well. So that's one of the key as we move forward towards integrating climate reporting with annual reporting. Next one, Sophie. There are some of the examples, and we'll put a link to some of these packages. Again, there are many other examples available. These are just few of them in terms of how regional groups or regional associations have started thinking about these kind of trainings and capacity building as far as climate related financial disclosures are concerned. So as I said, it's an evolving field, and there will be a lot of new things coming up in the next few months and years. Next is, again, an important aspect. So we have gone through what it means, what you need to do. Obviously, when all of these things need to be undertaken, there would be some challenges. Based on everyone's experience, there are two categories of challenges which every council faces as far as sustainability reporting or climate reporting or inventory is concerned across budget and people. There's always limited funding for data tracking, reporting purposes, and there's staff capacity and expertise to manage reporting processes. Always there's a lean team to manage this. Now, in terms of solutions for this, there's no one size fits all solution. However, some strategies might help. Next one, Sophie. One could be regional approach, and this has worked very well with some of the groupings. You might be part of some ROC, JO Alliance or any other grouping. If you take that specific project or program under that regional approach, that will give you economies of scale, learnings, information sharing, knowledge exchange. That could be one of the possible solution to overcome the other challenges. Second one would be starting simple. So whatever you have, wherever you are in your decarbonization pathway, start with that and keep improving over time on an annual basis. And third is setting up more sophisticated systems. It might require some budget to start with, but it significantly might reduce time spent by staff collecting and processing data. There could be examples are like data management platforms, and we'll hear from Matt in a few minutes from Trellis in terms of how data management platform has helped many councils. Just final takeaways from the reporting side of things. Climate reporting is not just about compliance, it's about financial sustainability, governance, and climate resilience. So your expertise is crucial in shaping how councils assess and manage climate risks. Now, it is the time to step up and lead, and let's make sure we embed sustainability into council decision-making at every level.
Thanks, Ankit. I'm sure those templates and examples will help a lot of people here today as they start to set up their own reporting system. So it's great to know there are those resources already out there. Next up, we have Matt Shorten, co-founder and director of Trellis, to explain how data management software can support local government climate action.
Thank you, Sophie, and thank you, Ankit. And hello, everyone. Absolute pleasure to be talking with you all today. Hopefully you can see my screen. I will just share it and expand that. I can see if he nods. Is that all right? We're good? Okay, excellent. Yeah, great to be talking to everyone. I think the bits that I'll cover should feed in quite well to what we've just heard. So I really appreciate that, that outline, Sophie and Ankit. So my name is Matt, co-founder and director of Trellis Technologies. What I'll be focusing on today is really a bit about us, where we've been and where we're going in terms of the legislative landscape. Sophie's covered most of that, but I'll maybe wrap that up with a few bits of intel. We'll then look at the Australian Sustainability Reporting Challenge. So, everything we're talking about, some of those sort of key questions and, some of the broader impacts that sort of framework's having and the opportunities, certainly with a digital or technology lens. I'll then cover off on some of the key characteristics and benefits from a digital transformation. So the sort of things that you might be able to take away and start to build a business case out of. I'll then touch on some of the Trellis features that are very much designed to help organisations with meeting their obligations under the ASRS framework and beyond. Some key considerations then around risk management predominantly, and then we'll close before handing over to Jamie at East Gippsland. So a bit about us. We're essentially a multidisciplinary team that have come together to really solve the data challenge that many of you, I'm sure, are experiencing on the call. My personal journey started in local government. So in the early 2000s, I was running the Cities for Climate Protection program for a number of councils before jumping out into the audit space. I ended up as an auditor with the Clean Energy Regulator for the first 8 years of the introduction of the ENGA legislation. So got to really understand some of the data challenges, faced by many organisations grappling with reporting obligations under legislation. Teamed up with essentially some software and data geniuses to launch Trellis in 2018. And here's a bit of a snapshot of our current leadership group. We're a team of 25-ish staff based in Adelaide and Sydney. Quite a bit of progress that we've achieved since launching in 2018. So we're up to over 28,000 unique facilities that we're tracking through the Trellis platform. So we've certainly designed the platform for scalability, for very fast, accurate translation of mixed format data that we typically experience in the ESG space. We're up to over 70 local government clients in Australia, which is fantastic, and that's growing quite rapidly. We're super passionate about that industry sector, one of the predominant ones that we're working in. And we have over 1,200 different suppliers that we're capturing data from. So that's, again, back to that mixed format data challenge that Ankit outlined, and I'm sure you're well aware of and experiencing potentially yourselves in terms of how you process, validate, interpret, a lot of the mixed format information that rolls through and is required to disclose. Thought I'd share this. This made me laugh a couple of weeks ago when someone shared this with me in terms of sort of where we've been. And I'm sure, again, many of you are familiar with this. On the left, there's a whole range of different standards and legislation that exist in Australia and globally. That, essentially as an ESG manager, you're tasked with solving or aligning with, when in reality on the right, the job typically relies on a, expert use of Excel and Teams. So I think on the right there, data and communication are certainly very predominant in this space, as I'm sure you'll all attest to. Here's another version of it that I tease our engineering team with quite regularly. But the use of Excel, can be quite predominant in a number of areas. In terms of where we're going, so just further to Sophie's commentary there, I think we're all well aware that the AASB S2 standards came into effect in January this year. We know that local government specifically doesn't have an obligation at this point to align with those standards or to meet the compliance obligations related to the standard. But what you can certainly see in the ASIC draft regulatory guide is some very clear indications here that there will be, alignment with these reporting standards applied to the public sector. So I think we need to be mindful of that, and it sounds like that's certainly, what people are certainly expecting. At an international level, we've seen the IPSASB also approve their first sustainability reporting standard exposure draft, and that was very much related to climate related disclosures and very much aligned with what we're seeing in the AASB framework here in Australia. So internationally, we've seen, you know, this ED1 that was published in October 2024 and is open for comment for the next 8 days. So I'd certainly encourage you to have a good look at that and, you know, potentially, you know, think about commentary around that. Don't have a link here, but if you do need it, certainly yell out and we can provide that for you. So I think the bottom line is, and, you know, as has been echoed by Sophie and Ankit, you know, we have these regulatory requirements that have been implemented here in the Australian landscape, and they will ultimately, you know, expectation that they will filter down through to local government eventually. When we boil down, I suppose, what is required under, you know, the AASB S2, what we see is a strong alignment with the ISO standards approach to these things. So a very strong focus on planning, doing, checking, correcting, and really enabling that through your organisation. Excuse me. So whilst we've had the likes of Climate Active, and we do have Climate Active in place, you know, that's very much focused on certifications around a outcome, i.e. I've achieved carbon neutrality as an organisation and, you know, as an event, as a product, etc. Whereas what we're seeing certainly in the ASRS is more of this continual improvement, open disclosures, risk management approach, etc. And this slide really is just to highlight, I guess, the fact what we're seeing is more and more goal setting, the implementation of projects to, you know, achieve progress towards those goals, and the ability to be able to report that progress back and be transparent about that deployment of capital, how effective it's been, and so on and so forth. So overarching all of this is that sort of risk assessment approach in terms of, you know, what are our risks and what should we focus on as a consequence of those risks. But this engine is the piece that the ASRS framework is looking to really engage, plan, do, check, correct, very aligned with the ISO standards. So ultimately, you know, as I'm sure many of you know, this approach, it has many values beyond an emission outcome value, obviously about driving broader sustainable business and organisations in terms of financial performance and disclosures as well. There is a big gap. So we've heard a lot about this gap in local government and other sectors where organisations are setting goals, reduction commitments, etc., but linking those sometimes diffuse and, you know, micro projects to a broader goal is sometimes challenging. So another part of the solution that we provide with Trellis is providing that very detailed view down to a meter level, showing progress and the results of many implemented projects, and not just limited to electricity. You know, it could be waste management, could be water management, fuel, etc. 4 key pillars that exist under the ASRS framework really are governance, strategy, metrics and targets, and risk management. So again, back to that sort of ISO approach, very much setting up a strong governance framework, risk assessments, etc., to be able to guide organisations in terms of where they're focusing their efforts, and many things sitting within that. So there's a lot of noise sitting below those 4 major pillars, so to speak. When we look at what we do, and you know, we're always banging on about this digital transformation, and I guess if you were to translate that term, you know, our thing is bringing order to chaos, so to speak. So when we, you know, partner and you know, work collaboratively or symbiotically with other organisations like Ironbark, you know, we have a very focused approach in what we do, and typically we're honing in on those repeatable processes that really shouldn't need manual intervention in this day and age. So our system is really geared on that. You know, what are those things that you do day in, day out to meet these requirements and to drive your business or organisation forward? That's the sort of thing that we can pick up and drive in a very automated way. We certainly aren't everything to everyone. So, you know, a lot of this specific technical advisory work that is done by the likes of Ironbark is very critical to the journey, and again, very symbiotic with what we do. We're very much support and serve mentalities, the likes of consultants accessing your data in Trellis, auditors accessing your reporting in Trellis, and stakeholders to drive engagement, accessing many pieces of information is super critical to that process. In terms of the characteristics and benefits of this digital transformation, this slide is really looking to show this, what we call a digital maturity curve here. So linking this maturity and productivity or pace in the sustainability space. So our job with Trellis is really to get our clients up to this very system-centric approach. So we've heard a bit about from Ankit and Sophie about, this manual data and this journey that a lot of organizations are on. Some of the benefits of getting to this point of a very system-centric approach are outlined here. So what we're talking about is high automation. So high automation in the data integration, processing, validation, interpretation. High scalability, so the ability to add new suppliers, evolve the data sets as you mature. Driving higher interaction in the data set. So, we've heard Ankit talk about the importance of bringing multiple stakeholders along. So certainly by bringing tangibility to some of this reporting, so not just emissions, units of consumption, waste volumes, diversions, etc., and also what you're spending on a lot of these resources, to make it quite tangible across different cohorts. Being able to provide very targeted insights. So again, down to performance on where you're spending money across your utility base, but also in emissions performance. Exception handling, so enabling alerts and things like that around different trends that we're seeing in the data set. Predictive analytics, quite important, looking at the future state. Data access, so we're seeing a large trend across the economy in terms of data warehousing, data lakes. So someone like Trellis that can come along and interact with a lot of your data, add a lot of value to that data in terms of insights. We need to be able to expose that back to your organization. So we do a lot of that transfer of the information that we capture back into your central repository in some form of data warehouse or data lake. Data security is super important. So we are a ISO 27001 certified organization and should be a key consideration of council, in this day and age. And importantly, down the bottom here, we're really about that product evolution. So as the market evolves, as technology evolves, as people's needs evolve, the system needs to be able to evolve at a pace that, keeps up with that. So if you're up this end. So if you're down this end of the maturity curve, the sort of things you could expect is, you're probably using Excel. It's what we'd consider quite decentralized data, perhaps questionable data integrity. It's not clear on what's estimated, what's actual data. And as a consequence of that, we've got a limited problem scope, low engagement, and low confidence in the information. And if you're in the middle, you may be using some form of a consolidated data hub, but again, you may have some limits in terms of automation, scalability, interaction, confidence, etc. So you'll get a copy of this deck after and have a think about where your organization does fit on this curve. In terms of this journey towards, and evolving, I suppose, the reporting against particularly Scope 3, this slide's really just to outline a lot of what Sophie mentioned in terms of this transition from, these coefficients around spend-based accounting to more activity-based accounting. So we are very much focused on that transition. A lot of these green squares that you're looking at are certainly the areas that we pick up in terms of activity data. A lot of the black boxes that you'll see are very much where we're operating in that spend-based accounting. So, these coefficients do exist. Absolutely, Climate Active do have a very extensive emission factor database. We actually privately license the same emission factor database from the suppliers of those emission factors so that we can provide that to our clients. But it does set up that way to be able to quickly, translate many of your upstream and downstream activities into an emission number for Scope 3. It's a starting point, but obviously over time you are going to want to more and more head towards more of that activity-based accounting. In terms of a bit of a deep dive into some of our tooling around that Scope 3 space, and when we look at this method of spend-based accounting, one of our tools, which I was thinking about bringing video in to show this, but I think I'll save it. And if anyone wants to see this, certainly reach out after the session. But what we've developed recently is this ability to drag and drop a general ledger export from your finance system into our tools or into our interface. And we can, using a machine learning process, run through, typically tens of thousands of lines of GL data to extract and allocate different spend categories to different emission categories and emission factors to enable you to very quickly map your GL to those Scope 3 factors and calculate your Scope 3s based on those categories. So a typical ledger might take 8 or 9 minutes to process, but as the system, is processing more and more and learning more and more, that'll get faster. But there's a very straightforward way of dragging and dropping your general ledger into the Trellis interface to extract those Scope 3 spend-based emission reports. Another bit that I think I wanted to highlight was, really getting back to this ASRS framework and the fact that many local governments do have targets that they've set. Setting up the ability to be able to track your progress towards those targets in next to real time is super important, and to be able to overlay different projects that you're working on to show the impact of those projects on your future state. So what we do in this space is we pick up your historical data and baseline information, and we project your emissions forward, taking a whole lot of considerations into that. You can overlay different targets related to where it is you want to be and when in the future, and then give you the ability to add new actions which can capture the spend, return on investment estimate, all sorts of different bits of information that will help track progress toward your target from an emissions perspective, but also from a return on investment in terms of dollar spent. Just to summarize, I guess, some of the key risks that you might want to think about, and I guess where we're positioned to help mitigate some of those risks. So what we hear a lot about is, define roles and responsibilities. It's a fundamental, it's a bit of a centerpiece, in fact, in the ASRS framework, is having defined roles and responsibilities, managing key person risk. So Trellis can really support that through, holding that system and enabling, different users to plug in and plug out as required, and also enable you to detect gaps and integrate and store that data securely and what have you. Violations of data privacy. So again, you really want to make sure that you are dealing with, the highest level of data security in this space. Lack of access and transparency in reporting from multiple, spreadsheets should be seen as a bit of a risk to any organization as they mature in this space. So our solution to that is unlimited user access, providing third-party access for consultants and auditors, and obviously providing that central access and storage. Being audit ready, critical risk and opportunity. So essentially what we do is look to link all original source data files with our calculations and methodologies. And that includes meter IDs, meter connections, disconnections, etc. So we're really looking to ensure that chain of custody and auditability in the data set when it comes to sampling and things like that. And another key risk and opportunity is really around that capital deployment and ROI tracking. So as councils and others spend more and more money and budget allocation to solving this challenge, you want to know that that money is working and you are getting that return on investment that was set out when you were proposed the project that you're implementing. So we can certainly track that in real time and show you how that's working in terms of reduced emissions, reduced spend, reduced resources or diversions in waste. Guys, thank you. Really appreciate your time. You will have my contact details, and thanks again for taking the time to listen to my section. I'll now, I think, hand over to Jamie at East Gippsland. Or back to you, Sophie.
Yeah, back to me just for a second. Thanks, Matt. So, yeah, really interesting seeing how the software solutions can help to overcome data management issues, which I know is a big problem for a lot of local governments. So thank you for talking us through how Trellis works with that. And yeah, so next up, we do have Jamie Lynch. So we know what people most like to hear is what other local governments are doing. So that's why we've got Jamie Lynch, who is a Sustainability Officer at East Gippsland Shire Council, and he's going to talk through what they've been doing in East Gippsland over the last few years.
All right, thanks for that, Sophie, and thanks, Matt. Yeah, we're looking to go through our journey to share with you how we look at our approach to sustainability and how we manage our emissions. So we've worked with both Trellis and Ironbark with our emissions management. So it's exciting to share our journey with you today. Thanks, Sophie. So just a bit of a profile of East Gippsland. Our shire is the easternmost local government area in Victoria. Our population's a tick under 50,000 and a land area mass of 20,000 square kilometres, which equates to about 10% of Victoria. Around 75% of the area is public land, so state forests and national parks. And the Gunai, Kurnai, Monaro and Bidwell people are the traditional custodians of the land. So this is a visual we use to provide an overview of our sustainability team's role within our council. We work as a three-person team with a coordinator and 2 officers, and we drive climate change policy projects across council. And we see ourselves as stewards of the environmental sustainability strategy and oversee delivery. And then we operate in the climate mitigation and adaptation spaces. So climate change has impacted East Gippsland quite a bit in recent history. One of the most devastating recent events was the Black Summer bushfires of 2019-20. So leading up to the fires, we experienced a drought between 2017 to 19, where we had 3 consecutive years of below average rainfall, which resulted in the driest 3-year period on record for the region. That was a catalyst for the size of the bushfires, where 65% of the shire was impacted and burnt, which was over 1 million hectares, and 346 homes were destroyed. So what does this mean for sustainability in our journey? So climate change is becoming more increasingly tangible for our community. Unfortunately, as a region, we're never far away from an emergency, and it's not just fires that we have to contend with. For example, in December 2023, we experienced flash flooding and tragically lost the life of 2 people. Emergency events have been a catalyst for change. There's a perception that it's changed the way our region thinks about emergency events and climate change and the broader impacts that come with it. So these events have emphasised the importance of our role in sustainability at council. And following these emergencies, we've noticed our community becoming more environmentally conscious. During our engagement for our council plan in 2021, the natural environment and climate change was our key emerged themes. And this led to increased engagement for our environmental sustainability strategy. So as a result, we were able to gain greater traction and engagement from community stakeholders and in the council chamber when engaging on the strategy, which led to the development of the 10-year strategy and 4-year accompanying action plan. So recently we've approved our greenhouse gas emissions reduction action plan, which was initiated from a goal in our strategy to achieve net zero by 2032. The first step in developing the plan was to collate our emissions inventory and establish a baseline for each emission source. We've been tracking and reporting our Scope 1 and 2 emissions annually for some time, so there is a lot of data already available. However, with the net zero target now in place, we expanded to include our historic landfill gas emissions using the Angus spreadsheet, and have also increased the tracking of a wide range of Scope 3 data sources, as shown here, which we've worked through with Trellis to get these figures and through the sources that they're able to provide. So this inventory, oh, sorry, just back. So the inventory shown here is being extracted directly from Trellis, where all these emission sources are now reported. Having each of these in the system allows us to generate our reports as needed, but also prepares us for any future mandatory reporting as well. The data is the foundation for our action plan, which details each emission source and steps needed to reduce them as much as possible by 2032. With our net zero targets, our net zero target focuses on Scope 1 and 2, but the plan also includes strategies for addressing Scope 3, which is a key part of our long-term reduction efforts. Thanks, Seth. So as part of our net zero planning process, we sought to identify the most cost-efficient pathway to reduce emissions within the set timeframe. So the planning needed to enable us to budget appropriately while also focusing on future return on investment. To achieve this, we engaged Ironbark Sustainability to create a financial modelling tool which emulates the actions from our emissions reduction plan and offers valuable insight into financial and carbon implications of implementing the actions. This tool can be used to lay the groundwork for developing future business cases to make that process more streamlined as well. The graphic you see here illustrates how the financial analysis aligns with the overall emissions reduction cycle and the touch point across each of the planning stages in the process. So this is a look a bit of the data around how we've developed that projection with the financial tool. So this is a look of our building facility data. We've also got one similar for our vehicle use. This inputs into the tool to give a breakdown of our energy consumption and each type of energy consumed from our vehicles as well, or mower or plant. And that data creates a basis for how we link in with the actions for developing the action plan. And this screenshot, although isn't overly attractive, it's a shot of the tool that we use, which is straight out of the Excel spreadsheet. So it aligns with our planned actions from our action plan, allowing us to set commencement dates for each of the actions, and then generates an estimated capital cost, project cost savings, and projected emission savings for each of these projects. The tool uses a suite of assumptions that are embedded to generate a forecast for cost of utilities and associated savings of the delivery of the actions. So the tool doesn't serve as a fixed project timeline, but rather creates potential costing scenarios for each project, and we can set the variables around the dates for the project and the size of the upgrade. So this shot gives us a better look at an individual action. The example shown here shows the projections if we were to replace the gas heating for electric in one of our libraries. In the chart, there's the financial impact, which is the blue line, which shows the capital cost of nearly 40,000, and then the annual savings would expect to increase year on year with the increase of cost of gas. And the orange bars show the emissions abated year on year up to 2041. And then we've got the table above, which shows what we can get on the return when we've got the ability to look at NPV, or the internal rate of return, and simple payback. And that can be used to prioritise delivery for projects. We're currently embedding this internally within our future planning process, project planning process, so that we can prioritise projects based on the greatest return and from both carbon and financial perspectives. And this is a look at the high level summary of what we can get out of the tool for financial and emissions again. So on this screen, there's the operational costs and savings in the chart to the left, where you can see the orange is showing us where the capital expenditure will be over the journey, and the green line shows us the savings that we can generate year on year from these projects. The table on the right shows the emission scenarios up to 2032, where we have our historic emissions. If we were to just go business as usual without delivering actions, and then the third column is emissions with the actions of the plan. And then we also have VECO, which is our 100% renewable power purchase agreement. So our electricity emissions are taken out of that. And below, which I haven't touched on yet with the tool, we've also linked it in with the cost of carbon credits. So when we reduce our carbon emissions, we'll be saving on our credits required when we get to a net target of 2032. But we can also have a look and see what the costing will be for purchasing credits. And that's also based on some forecasting modelling around high, medium, low costs of future ACCUs that will come up in the future. So we're able to incorporate that into our planning as well with cost savings. So following delivery of projects, we can then demonstrate the actual savings through Trellis. We will record the project completion date, where Trellis will then show future savings as usage reduces. Pictured here is a historic project with our savings changed over from our street lighting to LED globes, where through Trellis we can show the savings very easily through the system and pull out the reporting if we ever need to get into the detailed data. This is an important function, as sometimes there can be some skepticism around the forecasted savings on projects. So it's essential for us to be able to support our project projections with actual savings after the project is completed. So with these systems and processes in place, we use these three functions together to manage our emissions going forward. The action plan lists our actions to reduce emissions, Trellis gathers our emissions data and reporting, and the economic analysis indicates costings of the future projects. We have purchased the Trellis's new target module, which Matt was just showing us briefly on the screen before, which will embed our actions and emission savings into that system. At the moment, it's still work in progress with the data being input, so there's nothing tangible I was able to share, but we're really looking to elevate the use of that with this whole process as well for that future regression and projections. By linking these three systems together, we're able to set ourselves up for a greater chance of success. So integration across council. My role within the sustainability team is to work with the other areas of council. So I'll work as an internal liaison role that can embed our emissions reduction planning. Bringing people along on the journey early is always an important factor. We avoided potential resistance through early discussions on what we were building, and the impact on service areas. And it also gave us a good understanding of what's achievable for the different projects and forecasting. And we're working with the team so that they have the access to the data and systems to use when managing their assets. This is still a work in progress, but trying to decentralize the whole management of the system and the processing. So the challenges faced: investment required to make the transition is a major challenge, as the cost to transition to zero emissions is substantial, as we've been able to pick up from the use of the tool. The financial tool does help us estimate the capital cost of project and their anticipated returns, although we still need a detailed planning and phasing of projects to spread that financial burden over the years. Another one is the internal cultural change. So we're working on embedding a mindset of considering zero or low emissions options in service delivery and project design or upgrade of assets. So previously our team was often involved too late in the capital projects to influence key decisions. So to enhance our ability to impact decision making, we're implementing a few changes, such as we're developing up an ESD policy, participating in pre-project planning meetings to get early insight into upcoming projects. And as a team, we're collaborating with the corporate strategy team to strategically embed emissions consideration into all types of council operations. As Sophie mentioned earlier in the presentation, landfill gas is a major issue for certain councils, where with our emissions profile, over 80% of our scope 1 emissions come from landfill gas. So we manage 4 reportable landfills, and 2 of which are still receiving waste, but all 4 are still emitting reportable gas out of them. So the difficulty here is that there's no immediate solution to achieve net zero emissions, but we're taking a long-term approach to make reductions where we can. Our waste team has scoped a project plan to reduce gas generation through initiatives such as gas flaring, construction of a FOGO facility, and reducing incoming commercial organic waste as much as possible as well. Another key project that we're looking at into the future is managing scope 3 emissions from our external contractors. And we've started developing a process to address that. So we've begun with gathering fuel use from our curbside waste collection contractor, which is uploaded into Trellis and identifies the source as a contractor and classifies it as scope 3 emissions. And that's what the table is on the right there, where it goes straight into that contractor fuel. The next steps around that data collection process for us is to work through with some of our larger contractors and focus on different types of material that we can start to gather that data for, what their concrete use, fuel, asphalt, and we'll start to leverage our procurement policy sustainability component in our tender application submissions to request these data and work with them on that. That way, when we start to build the profile for the larger ones, we can start to work through that to the smaller ones and see where we can really influence and work through there. And just recently, we've initiated some discussions with the current potential contractors through workshop presentations. That's a way to start the conversation. So the next steps for us, we're going to work with our capital team to gather more data on the contract usage, which I was just referring to. In partnership with our capital project team, we're going to embed the financial analysis tool to our future capital works program so we can prioritise the projects for the greatest return. And as I touched on briefly before, we're working on really developing the Trellis targets module to use that for our forecasting tool and keep it all the data centralised. So that's a look at our journey. Thanks for letting us share today and hopefully gain some valuable insight.
Thanks so much, Jamie. It's really great to hear from someone who's on the ground navigating these challenges of taking sustainability reporting out of just your team and making it a whole of council responsibility. So thank you for talking through your journey. To wrap up the kind of more formal part of today's presentation, so a quick recap on some of the key takeaways. In terms of current statewide requirements for climate reporting, only Victorian councils have obligations, but many local governments are preparing for mandatory reporting, and the climate-related disclosure standard provides a good model for this. Now is the time to start exploring your supply chain emissions and be warned that they can radically change your inventory. And these are the 6 things councils are doing as they prepare for climate reporting. Emissions, inventory and action plan, climate risk assessment and adaptation plan, and then establishing reporting systems for both mitigation and adaptation. We're going to start our Q&A in a moment, but I know not everyone will be able to stick around for that. So I'd like to thank you all for coming, and also ask that before signing off, you fill in our feedback form. So just click on the link that Charlotte will have popped in the chat, hopefully. So completing this will give you a download link to all of our slides today, and a reminder that the recording will be available on our website soon. So with that, we might jump into our Q&A. Please put your questions in the chat and we'll try our best to answer them all. So let me just have a look at, might start with a couple that we got in through the sign up forms. So one for Matt Shorten. So with Trellis, what level of internal resourcing is needed to ensure data completeness and accuracy, and how much manual checking and verification is required?
Okay, yeah, good question. Thank you for that. It's we look to take a lot of the burden off through implementation and ongoing maintenance of the platform. So our objective very early is to set up automation wherever we can in terms of data inputs. I'd say that's 80 to 90% of your data, if not more, could be set up to be feeding through to us. So in terms of the data inputs, one of our first things we do is develop that data planning around ways to get the key bits of information into Trellis. So yeah, I mean, on that regard, we're looking to take that time sink away from you. In terms of alerting and data gaps and different things that pop up, we also have a notification mechanism that can notify people of data gaps. But there's ways that we kind of make sure we're in lockstep essentially with your finance system so that we're getting every bit of data they're getting. Yeah, so it's hopefully that helps in some way to answer it, but it's largely an automated approach. That is certainly our key objective and measure of success.
Great, thanks, Matt. We've had a question come in about which department has mandated the Victorian reporting requirements and who do they report through. I might get Ankit, do you?
Yeah, as far as I can recall, I think it's from Department of Treasury and Finance. It's within the financial reporting directive applicable to agencies within the state government.
And so that was delivered through the Local Government Act itself. And it's also not, it's quite general. It's nowhere near as specific as the climate related disclosures standards as to what needs to be covered and things like that. So whilst Victoria does have obligations to take into account climate change in decision making, there's not kind of clear reporting guidelines around that at the moment. So that's, yeah, so whilst Victoria does already have obligations, we're expecting that they will change as well with these new standards. People got more questions. See what else we've got. So a question maybe for Jamie. How do we persuade, sorry, not that one. So because sustainability officers already have a lot of programs to deliver across the council, so how can they raise the profile and importance of this reporting to their executive teams? So what are some of the things you've done to kind of take it out of just the sustainability team and getting other teams involved?
Yeah, thanks, Sophie. We try and look at it from a few different perspectives. With the financial tool, we can really back around where the emissions are, linking it with the costing as well. So that gives us the ability to put some financial dollars on what we're emitting out of our assets and vehicle use. In terms of decentralising, it's a real hard one because sometimes you go into people to ask them to do something extra above what they're already doing, and it's a really difficult space, but we've got the backing from our executive team to really push this and promote and get that engagement across our organisation. So I think we're in a lucky space where we actually have that, where we can really push it, because that's coming from the top, that this is an important factor for what we're trying to achieve as an organisation. And even for the community, where we've heard feedback from our community that climate change and the natural environment is a major concern. It's getting constantly discussed and raised, and we're getting some really good engagement when we go out to the community on certain things around sustainability. So we really look to really leverage that support we have from upper management.
Do you have any advice for sustainability officers at councils where there's not necessarily the same amount of support coming from the executive or from councillors, and particularly in terms of getting those comprehensive action plans off the ground?
Yeah, I think it's a lot of degree of constantly being there and making sure that you've got that constant voice. If you don't have the necessary support, making sure you keep pushing it, because obviously it's an important part of what we do as council. It's part of the Local Government Act that, in Victoria, I should say, specifically, where it's a requirement of our Local Government Act that environmental sustainability and climate change is a consideration. And we've had the situation where even our councillors have had a look at, they've ignored the advice around that whole, the climate change impacts of a decision. And we've got our lawyers in to talk about what the outcome would be if there was an issue associated with it, what the climate change impacts are. So there's also the backing there as well from that perspective.
Yeah, great, thank you. We've had a question on whether anyone has thoughts on how a change of government might affect the mandatory reporting requirements. Obviously, we've got a federal election coming up within a matter of months. Ankit, I might throw to you if you've got any thoughts on that.
That question has been asked before as well. As far as the legislation goes, even if the government changes, that will continue, and that kind of disclosure would be required as we move forward, unless something drastically changes, and which nobody can predict. But as far as the disclosure is concerned, that will continue. Specific to, I think, just to add, specific to local government, because that's currently not under any compliance. So we'll wait and watch in the next few years what comes in.
And we've also had a question around, so yeah, a lot of people are probably aware there's been a review of Climate Active that was meant to be released last year, but hasn't yet, which comes into some of the confusion around coefficients and things like that. But also a question on confusion on when location and market-based, so this is around electricity scope 2 emissions, will no longer be an equal choice. Ankit, do you have any more to add? So the question is, what does AFRS require on this disclosure, and which one should be used towards net zero claims? I believe the standards doesn't go into that level of detail, but I might be wrong. But Ankit, just from kind of the Climate Active perspective.
Yes, and that's a good question. So as far as my understanding goes, AFRS typically does not mandate which method should be used, although the emphasis is on transparency in reporting. So whosoever is reporting must disclose the method used for calculating scope 2 emissions. Whereas as far as net zero claims are concerned, I believe it's critical to use market-based scope 2 emissions, because net zero claims are generally based on the actual emission reductions, and an organization or council is directly responsible for. So it allows for more accurate reporting of council's efforts to purchase renewable energy or do any other emission reduction activities, initiatives or activities. Whereas location-based is simply just the grid's average emissions for that location. So for net zero claims, I think market-based. AFRS, whichever method you want to use, just disclose it.
Thanks, Ankit. We've got another question from the sign-ups about, this might be another one for Matt. Are there any case studies on the software integration of like financial accounting and carbon emissions accounting? So we know that, yeah, the standards are very much written for accountants and by accountants. So is there much out there already showing kind of how that works?
So sorry, is this question written down, or is it I can't see the actual question. Sorry, Sophie. So the question, can you just repeat that?
Yeah, so sorry, this is a in the sign up, this came in. So are there any case studies on the software integration of financial accounting and carbon emissions accounting?
Right. Yep. So integrations in terms of software integration with our platform. Yeah, look, I mean, we can provide some good examples of how that transfer of data happens. So, I mean, a predominant system being Tech One that a lot of councils would use. When we talk integrations, it's not really possible to integrate with that platform yet. We are sort of engaging with them as closely as we can, and would love to be able to sort of seamlessly integrate data, but we can certainly push and pull. An example is, generating export files that match import rules in Tech One. Yeah, and same with getting general ledger reports out of a finance system. It typically can be exported, in a CSV format, and we can absorb it in that way. So there's a number of ways of transferring information between platforms, but again, depend on what platform you're using and what public API they have available. Yeah, hope that helps.
Yep, no, that makes sense. And yeah, I can see that it would be, yeah, I mean, there's lots of different financial software offerings out there, so they're all going to do something differently, which I imagine makes your job quite difficult trying to standardize that process. Another question in from the chat. Capital cost for sustainability initiatives often come from different budgets than where the cost savings may be materialised. So can the cost outlay and cost savings be more closely aligned rather than just general savings for council? Amy, I don't know if you, I have heard this come up before as a problem. So it could be the capital works team that's putting out the money for a more efficient building or solar or something like that. But then it's the kind of asset management team that then recoups those financial savings, and their budgets aren't necessarily, they're kind of separate. Jamie, do you have anything to answer? Have you kind of, as you've started to implement some of your actions, how to resolve that conflict?
No, we actually haven't. Nothing unique to be able to share. It is a similar problem to what Patrick's picked up in the comments.
Yeah. I think the main solution that I've come across is having some kind of, often called a revolving energy fund or sustainability fund, something like that. And so that's where those savings don't get kind of given to that team. They get pulled out to go into a bucket that is then reinvested in more projects. That obviously does then kind of have impacts on that reporting for those individual teams, but can be kind of a fairer way to approach it, I guess. Please, if anyone else has done something different, feel free to add it in the chat. I think that covers all the questions we've had. I might give people another minute. Thanks, Tim. Appreciate it. And yes, a reminder from Charlotte to fill out our feedback form before you jump off. And I would like to thank all of our speakers today. So really appreciate you sharing all of your experience and advice on sustainability reporting. So big thank you to Matt, Jamie and Ankit. And I'd also like to thank the people behind the scenes who have been busy answering questions in the chat and making sure the webinar ran smoothly. So thanks Charlotte, Paul and Christina. And finally, thank you all for coming and for all your great questions. You're the reason we are able to put on these webinars because of your interest and passion. Don't forget, we're always happy to discuss any of this at any time, so just get in touch. In the feedback form, there is a request if you want to chat or any help on anything. So yeah, just put it in there and we'll be in touch over the next week or so.